Good evening and welcome to the Canadian Orthodox Monastery of All Saints of North America again. And as we promised, we are shooting this webcam. It's hardly shooting, but anyway, we're filming outdoors in a different location on the monastery grounds for several times so people can get a bit of a tour of the monastery. And today we're looking toward what we call the Celtic Garden because it features a Celtic cross and a small belvedere, Besiedka, for sitting out in the evening under the shade. And we wanted to also ask if people will tell us how the picture comes out, whether they can actually see, because it's still a little bit light in the daytime, and the camera might be a little bit overexposed. But this evening I want to address a question that was asked about the Old Testament and about that rather troublesome book called Judges. We read about the story of Jephtha, who rather foolishly made a vow that if he would win a certain battle, he would offer to God the first thing that he came to him when he came onto his property, the first thing that he saw or came across. And as you know, his daughter, who was his only child, rushed out to meet him, and it appears, at least on the surface, that he offered her as a human sacrifice, and that of course is very distressing to a lot of people, and it would have been, I dare say, distressing to God also. So I want to offer an alternate interpretation, understanding of that, simply because God had forbidden in both Leviticus and Deuteronomy human sacrifices, and particularly your sons and daughters. And he's very strong about that. Leviticus chapter 18, I don't remember the verse, and 20, and Deuteronomy 12 and 18, I think 18:10, 12:30 or 31 and 18:10, anyway, Deuteronomy, where we're forbidden to offer sons and daughters as sacrifices, or any human sacrifice. And God condemns that very strongly. Consequently, we can't imagine that he would have accepted the human sacrifice of Jephtha's daughter. Now, no place in this entire story does it suggest that God approved this promise, that he approved the sacrifice, or that he would have accepted the sacrifice. And nowhere are we told that his daughter was actually killed. We know that she asked to be able to go away with some of her friends into the mountain and lament for her virginity. And so we rather suspect that she was offered in a different way. Apostle Paul tells us in Romans somewhere to offer ourselves, Romans 12:1, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and undefiled to God, or holy and well-pleasing to God. So I'm going to suggest that perhaps she was offered in a different way, that she remained under a vow of virginity for all of her life, and perhaps served in the temple somehow. I mean, the temple, as we know, it hadn't been built, but anyway, served in the sanctuary of God in some capacity. Now, I suggest that simply because if someone was stoned to death by Moses for breaking the Sabbath, how much more would Israel have been inclined to stone to death a man who offered his own daughter as a human sacrifice when God had so strictly forbidden that in the law? And when he had demonstrated in the story of Abraham and Isaac, the main purpose of that story was for God to inform Israel that a human sacrifice was not acceptable, that he was giving another kind of sacrifice, and that the people round about Israel who offered their sons and daughters in human sacrifices were not at all pleasing to him. Persons who offered a human sacrifice would be an abomination to God. And in Deuteronomy, he's complaining that the nations around about pass their children through the fire, offer them as human sacrifices to their idols. So human sacrifice is a form of idolatry. And perhaps that even says something about abortion. Perhaps it's also a form of idolatry because it's a human sacrifice to something else, to human ego and human self-centeredness. So we want to respond to this question that we've asked simply by suggesting that it would have been too great a violation of God's law and too contrary to what God had revealed for a human sacrifice to have been offered and to have been acceptable, and for a man who had offered his daughter as a human sacrifice not to have been stoned to death or otherwise punished by the rest of Israel. And so this is what I would like to offer in response to the question about the sacrifice of Jephtha and his daughter. Now, it would have been a great sacrifice in any case if she was actually his only child. Then it would mean that his family line would be absolutely cut off if she maintained her virginity. And lamenting for her virginity, of course, because she would not be married and have any children. I'm just offering this as a suggestion. I'm not offering it as a concrete answer. I'm not offering it as a bit of theology. I'm simply saying that the sacrifice or offering of his daughter as a human sacrifice to God by, offering her as a slain sacrifice, to have killed her and offered her, would have been so diametrically opposed to everything that God had taught and commanded and legislated about this sort of human sacrifice, that it's very difficult to accept that somebody in Israel would have offered such a sacrifice, and if they had, they would have gone unpunished for having done so. And we don't have even the finish of the story. We're not told that he took her someplace and tied her to an altar and sacrificed her. So I'm suggesting that the sacrifice was of a different nature, a kind of servitude to the sanctuary of the ark at the time, and that she wasn't offered literally as a human sacrifice. That actually would be more in keeping with the law and God's commandments, and God would not have accepted such a sacrifice in any case. And doubtless Jephtha would have suffered enormously had he violated God's law in such a great and gross way. So you can ponder that, take it as you will, think it over, reject it, accept it. I'm not offering it as a concrete statement of this is actually what happened. I'm simply saying, this is a very good chance that this is what happened. And that's my answer to the question about Jephtha's sacrifice. We can go on a little more through the book of Judges and perhaps touch on Samson a little bit, because people asked also about the cutting of Samson's hair and how would that have deprived him of his strength, and could his strength have really been in his hair? Samson was a Nazirite. He was under vows of chastity, avoidance of hard liquor or alcohol, except for ordinary wine, and not to cut his hair or his beard. So I will go into that in some detail later because there's not really enough time now. But I want to suggest that the cutting of Samson's hair was simply a revelation or the seal of his having violated his Nazirite vows, so that he lost his strength by having violated his Nazirite vows and really abandoned his actual service to Israel as judge, and that the cutting of his hair was really a testimony that he had violated the vows, and the vows were null and void, and that whatever God had given him in return for the Nazirite condition were lost to him, and so his hair was cut. But his strength was in the Nazirite vow itself, not literally in the hair. The long hair, the uncut hair, was simply a manifestation of the Nazirite vow. and the cutting of the hair